Hey everyone, it's MusicTechHelpGuy, and in this video, I'm going to show you 8 methods that I like to use to build transitions between different song sections. So by a transition, I mean a section that builds tension or intensity at the end of one section so that you get the maximum impact at the beginning of the following section. So the techniques I'll show you in this video are not necessarily self-contained either, meaning that you can actually combine 2 or more of these techniques to get the most impact. For this video, I'll start with simple techniques and gradually progress up to more advanced techniques. So I've got a musical example here with just a basic intro, and then the beat sort of drops here at measure 9. This isn't like a super hard beat drop or anything. You know, this could be a verse, it could be a chorus, it could be a bridge, it could be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be a beat drop section per se. So at measure 9, there's sort of a reinforced kick drum. There's an additional instrument and an effects crash here already. And, you know, that does a pretty good job, but I just feel like I want some tension to build up in these last 4 bars here, or even just the last 2 bars before measure 9, just to make measure 9 have more impact. So for my first technique, you can use a low pass or high pass filter to sort of choke off some of the frequencies leading up to where the next section is, or in my case, where the beat drops. So what I like to do is add the filter to everything, and you can do this by showing your output track, your stereo output track. You can do this by pressing Shift-Command-M. This will show your output track. This is the same as the stereo output in the mixer here. And on the stereo output, I have a limiter on here just to keep things from clipping, but I'm going to add the channel EQ. And actually, you know what? Let me show you the easy way to do this first. You can use the auto filter. So the auto filter has a few other modules in it. So I'm going to turn off the distortion, LFO, and envelope. But you can keep the filter on, and you can apply either a high pass or low pass filter sweep to this using the cutoff frequency by automating the cutoff frequency. So maybe I want to automate the cutoff so that I'm cutting out more and more of the highs as I approach measure 9. So you can do this by pressing A to show your automation, clicking here in the automation menu, and then under auto filter, I'll select the cutoff parameter. And then what I can do is click here and draw in that cutoff automation. Now, if you want your automation to snap to the grid lines like it's doing here, you're just going to right click or control click in here and select snap automation. So let's say that I want the filter to roll out a good chunk of the high frequencies in these last 4 bars. Now I want the high frequencies to come back in at measure 9. So what I'm going to need to do here is create another point, roll this all the way up, and then just push this forward, just like so. Now, it's not going to let you do it like that. So what you'll have to do is zoom in here, turn off the automation snap, move this one back just a touch, and then re-snap the automation and pull this one forward. So that's doing it with a low pass filter. You can do it with a high pass filter as well, depending on the material you're working with, especially if there's bass, a lot of heavy bass in the section. If you use a high pass, this can work pretty effectively as well. The only thing that's tricky here is you sort of have to work in reverse. A cutoff at 0 with a high pass means you're getting all of the frequencies in there. As you pull this up, you're cutting out more of the lows. So when the beat drops, that's where you want this to drop back down to 0. So you could start higher, or you could gradually move higher. I think I'm going to start kind of high, and then I'm going to roll this up. And then at measure 9, I'll kind of do the same thing. I'll unsnap my automation, nudge that over, create a new point, resnap the automation, pull this over, and drop it down. Maybe even that's a bit much. Let's pull it down a bit. And maybe even that was a touch more than it needed to be. I could probably roll it down a bit more. Now, another thing you can do, too, to kind of give this even more tension is you can roll up the resonance. Resonance is going to create a feedback loop at the cutoff frequency. So if you click here, this will create another automation lane, and I can select the auto filter's resonance here, and I can draw in a filter sweep here as well. Again, sort of doing the same thing, building up the resonance, and then dropping it back down to 0 right when the beat hits. And if you want these slopes to be different shapes, you can use the automation curve tool to sort of make it more of an exponential thing where most of the energy and most of the movement happens at the very end. So you can do that as well. Now, using low and high pass filters is a really basic way to create transitions, and they're often more useful when you pair them with another technique. So I'll get to that later on in this video. So let me show you yet another technique. Instead of using a high or low pass filter, I'm just going to bypass the auto filter. Another way is to create a band pass filter sweep, meaning a band that sort of closes down to just a limited number of frequencies and then opens back up on both the high end and the low end. So the way I like to do this is to use the channel EQ. And again, you can do this directly on your stereo output, or you can do it on a track stack or on just some of the instruments. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? Instead of doing this on the stereo output this time, I'm going to put all of these instruments in a track stack. I'll make it a summing stack. And then on the summing stack, I'll add the channel EQ. And what I want to do is I want to kick in both the high pass and the low pass filter. Now, if it's an intro for a song, you could start with it band passed like this. A band pass filter is essentially just a combined high and low pass filter. And then what I'll do is slowly open up both of the filters, or slowly close them and then immediately open them. So there's different ways you can do it. This is like a song intro. You could slowly open these up. But for me, I think what I'll do is I'll sort of set these a little higher like this and lower. So it's already partially band passed, and then I'm going to pull this down to, say, 800, or up to 800, then pull this down to around 2500, and then right when the beat drops, open these up completely. Let's do that with automation. Let's get our starting point here. Then I'll press A to show automation. On my automation parameters, I'll go to channel EQ high cut frequency. Click here to show another automation parameter. This will be the low cut frequency. What I'm going to do is sort of, like I said before, sort of choke this off down to like 2.5. And this one's going to roll up to around 800. And then once again, I've got to kind of do that little thing with the snap automation to sort of move this forward a touch. Turn my snap automation back on, create another point and pull this all the way up. It opens up the filter completely. And let's give that a listen, and I'll just pull up the channel EQ while that's playing back. Now, another thing you might find yourself doing is compensating for the loss of volume as well. So you could draw in like a volume ramp here. Because the filter ends up reducing the overall volume quite a bit, you may choose to sort of compensate for that volume loss as well. So that's using a bandpass filter. That's also one of my other favorite techniques. But again, like with the low pass and high pass filter, it's often done best when mixing it with another technique. So let's keep this bandpass filter sweep here, and let's add to it. So another thing you can add to all this is you can either find a riser sample or create your own riser. So one way I do this is I use an app for sampling called Splice, and you can search up risers. There's various different loops and samples for risers. So there's one. I can just drag this in. I'm gonna go ahead and make this go to the summing stack as well. So the summing stack is bus 1. So I'll make the output of this also go to bus 1. There we go. And you don't have to. I mean, if you want your riser to be independent of the summing stack, that's totally fine. You can do that as well. What I'll do here is just hold Option and trim this out. Again, using a snap mode like beat or bar to make sure this exactly 8 bars or exactly 4 bars long. And let's see what this sounds like. Another thing you can do with risers is you can add drum buildups to them to sort of accent the riser a bit more. So for instance, maybe I'll just create a new software instrument here, and I'll load up just any drum machine that has a nice kick drum in it. I'll go with this after party instrument here. I'll create a new pattern region. You can use a MIDI region too if you want. Let's see. That's fine. So I might start with, 4 quarter notes, and then actually 8 quarter notes, and then maybe I'll switch to eighths, and then eighths, and then sixteenths for the last 2 beats. So you end up with something like this. And you could make the drum kit go to your summing stack if you wanted to. You could filter it separately. You could make it lose some of its top end or lose some of its low end. You could individually bandpass it. Do whatever you want with it. Let me just try sending this over to the other summing stack there. So you can do something like that. Now, using samples and loops for risers is a bit tricky because I find myself just using the same ones all the time. So something that is maybe a bit more interesting is to create your own riser. So for example, I'll just pull up maybe retro synth. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. I'll just choose one of the presets in here, maybe this big sinker. That'll work just fine for this. And then what I'll do is create a pattern region, and I'll just make it straight 8th notes. Just like that. And I could maybe repeat this for an 8-bar phrase there for the whole intro. Now, on its own, just repeating that note D isn't very effective. Let's transform this into something that builds tension. So the first thing you can do is we can pitch shift this over time, like an octave or 2 octaves. Logic has a pitch shifter plugin but it's not really the most effective way to pitch shift something in really small, fine increments. The best way to do this is to use Logic's AU pitch plugin. You can get to this by going to Audio Units, Apple, and then AU pitch. Load that up in stereo. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to automate the pitch by negative or positive 2400 cents. So that's 2 full octaves lower and 2 full octaves higher. And you can also adjust the blend of this. You can adjust the smoothness and tightness controls, which are really helpful for maintaining the tone, the proper tone of the instrument as you're pitch shifting. So what I like to do is press A to show automation, open up the AU pitch automation here, and select the pitch option. Then at a certain point, you can start to move this upward. Or maybe I'll just do it right from the beginning, starting at 0 and pitch shifting upward over 2 octaves. And then you can adjust the tightness and the smoothness to dial in a setting that gives you the least amount of artifacting. And you know what? Maybe I'll just make this 4 bars. I don't even need to make it 8 bars. We can just do all of this in just this last 4 bars here. And then what I like to do is add some delay and reverb just to give it a little bit of ambience. It's a little dry right now. So maybe I'll add in a 16th note delay and maybe a dotted 8th note delay. There we go. Let's filter that out just a touch. And then maybe I'll add a little reverb. I'll just use Space Designer here. I'll just choose one of the presets up here. I'll go with the shimmering plate reverb. Let's see what that sounds like. So that, along with, you know, the kick idea here, can help build tension. And you can create any riser sound you want just by swapping out, you know, whatever starting instrument you're using here. Let's maybe try a different one and see how this one compares to that last one. So there's all sorts of different ways you could do this. You could feed this into the summing stack, into the filter, or you could choose not to. It's completely up to you. Another method I find really useful to layer with risers and buildups is to take a crash, like a cymbal crash or an effects crash or a white noise crash, and reverse it and use it as a swell to build up to where the beat drops. So right here at measure 9, I have this effects crash. It's just a white noise crash. One thing I could do is I could copy this down to another track, click on it, go to your region inspector up here, and then reverse that sample. And then what I can do with this is I can line it up the best you can, where you want the end of the sample to go. Pull that over a bit. I'll make sure I'm in absolute grid. Let's trim that up a little bit there, just like so. And you can even add reverb to this if you want. I'll add like that same setting that I was using before, large spaces, plate reverb, shimmering plate, just to add a little bit of ambience to it. Between the 3 of these plus the filter sweep that's going on up here on the summing stack, this can be a really effective way to build tension into the next section. And again, the crash effects, if you want it to be even more effective, you could maybe take it out of the filter effect, out of the filter sweep. Now, another way to take this even further is to create a stutter note repeater effect using the Remix Effects plugin. So on my summing stack here, I'm going to load up Remix Effects. You could put it on the stereo output as well. It all depends on the instrumentation you're working with. And I love the note repeater here. It repeats notes. It does exactly what it says it does. When you use remix effects, you have to be careful to sort of use it sparingly, but use it effectively. You know, the most ineffective thing you can do is just go wild with remix effects and just pollute your song with too many effects. I'm just going to use this a touch, right? Probably at measure 7 and 8 to just build up some tension on the instruments going into the summing stack. Maybe not even measure 7. Maybe something like that. So what I'm going to do is press A, turn on a live automation mode, like touch or latch, and then just press play and then write in that automation. Now, what I just played in wasn't perfect, but the good news with Remix Effects, if you keep clicking that plus button, it'll eventually show you all of the parameters within Remix Effects. There we go. So it's repeater mix, repeater rate, and then repeater on or off. So up top here, I'm just going to snap this to bar 8 through bar 9, just so the on and off are exactly on those bars. And then what you can do is sort of modify the automation to your liking. If you feel it needs to be modified, maybe I need to pull that back, pull that back. You can redraw lines if you want to. So even if you choose not to use the actual live automation, the real-time automation you drew in, you can still sort of use it as a starting point. You can come back in here with the pencil tool if you like and redraw some of these lines if you feel it necessary. Just make sure after you draw in automation to switch this back to read mode so you don't accidentally write in any additional changes. One of my other favorite transition effects is to use a tape stop effect within Remix Effects. Now, if you click here, you can adjust the tape stop time. So this one's a whole note. This is a quarter note. So I'm going to keep it on a quarter note. But as you're hearing, not everything is going to the stack, so you're not hearing it on everything. So on my stereo output, I'm just going to add an additional Remix Effects that's just going to be used for the tape stop effect. So once again, I'll just set this to a live mode, like touch or latch, and then just press the stop button where I want the tape stop effect to go. So then you can also come in here, and like I said before, use that snap automation to make sure that these automation points are going where you want them to go. There we go. That's exactly the effect I was looking for. So tape stop effect, I love using it for transitions. It can be used just on its own. It doesn't have to be used, you know, with all of these other effects. I'm just sort of building on all of my previous ideas. Now this last technique, I call it a false start because some motive from the main beat comes in, but then the rest of the beat is still delayed. And you can use this in conjunction with any of these other techniques I've demonstrated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bass idea here. I'm going to duplicate it. And actually, I don't want to duplicate the whole thing. So let me just put this on bar. And I'm going to copy this part down. So what I'll do is I'm going to cut out these. I'll just mute them. Control M. There we go. Mute that. Mute these chords. I'm going to move the crash back. And watch what happens. It's like the beat still comes in at 9, but it's a false start. You get a little bit of the bass, and then the rest of the beat kicks in at 11. When you borrow an idea from the drop, you need to change it in some way or filter it in some way, because this whole time building up to measure 9, everything's filtered. So what I'll do with the false start bass is I'll band pass this with the channel EQ, and I might add some distortion or some other modulation effects later, but let's give this a listen as is. Yeah, so I think I'm going to add distortion to this. Maybe I'll use like the bit crusher here. And maybe I'll add the EQ after the bit crusher instead. So let's listen to that whole thing one more time. Another thing I could do to make this more effective is to kill any reverb tails at measure 9. So you get this big swell and this big buildup, and it just cuts to nothing but the bass. So maybe on my crash effects here, I could just cut the volume there down to 0, and any of these other instruments too that might be putting out reverb tails. I think pretty sure that the riser is going to as well. I could take the bass out of the summing stack too and mute the whole summing stack here at bar 9, but I don't think I need to do that. I think that's fine like that. And then yet one more thing you can do with this is you can play with the pan too, because it's isolated. You're going to hear all of the pan adjustments. So let me just show the pan absolute controls here. And then what I can do is start this off mostly on the left, and then maybe jump over to the right side, mostly on the right side. And then for the last couple notes here, go back to the center. So let's see how that works out. So there's all sorts of crazy things you can do. Yes, I know my summing stack is clipping. You'd have to, figure out your volume levels there going into the summing stack and pull that down for proper mixing. But those are 8 transition effects I like to use to sort of build tension and make new sections hit with more impact. So you've got low and high pass filters, bandpass filters, risers, create your own risers with the AU pitch, reverse crash or white noise, using remix effects for note repeats, using remix effects for tape stop, and false starts. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. Leave a comment below and let me know what video you would like to see next. As always, thank you for the support, and thanks for watching.